Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 34 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got the clueless Harvey Green. Harvey, how's it going?
Pretty good, pending whatever's going to happen after me finding out why I'm clueless.
So Harvey has no idea what topic we're going to cover because he's a few minutes late, and Jaira and I picked it, and then we didn't, because he wasn't in the Zoom in time, he didn't get the chat piece, so he's kind of in the dark, but that's okay. You'll be fine. Just know that in Jaira we trust, and just hold on for the ride.
I think that's what they call a first mover advantage, right?
Yeah. What is it called?
Okay.
First mover advantage? Is that how that works?
Oh yeah. Well, I still lose most of the time, even when I have first move, and that includes playing chess with my 12-year-old. So it is what it is. So Jaira Cox is with us. Jaira, and we were just having this off camera, off recording conversation around why it's so hard for VARs to just go recommend good solutions to good customers with good technologies, good vendors, and grow. I think we're just a bunch of sales engineers or engineers that don't understand why just doing good business isn't good enough. And we were just kind of chatting through that. I figured I'd bring it up here.
Yeah,
it is. It should be.
It's universal, right? It's tough to not know what you don't know, and if that includes, like, I don't know why I should pay for design services for this new cluster, for this new app, for this migration that I want to take on. Well, then I'm going to have a hard time seeing value in buying those design services and making sure my design looks right before I go buy the infrastructure to run that application on.
Yeah.
And that just seems like a bad idea to me, to go through something without going through design and architecture first.
But you guys have all been responsible for running systems at some point. You know that you need to evaluate and you need to design, you need to pilot. But how many of your projects really do all those things?
It depends on whether or not I'm in charge of that project.
Yeah, and it depends on, so much of that kind of effort, right, is around reducing risk, right? Because that's ultimately, I think, what it comes down to is we think it's X, but what if we are wrong? We think this is Y, but what if we are wrong? And how will we handle that circumstance if we are wrong? Okay, I know that I need to add a node. I need this more capacity, this much more throughput. It's the multi-level thinking about how do I handle all these outcomes, whether they're likely or not likely.
Right.
It's more than we do for, now we're just totally riffing in any random direction. It's more than we do for almost any part of our personal life, right? Like, we all hopped in this meeting. We've all had a successful work day, I would assume, without planning for 9 levels of contingency, right? We didn't have a design session before we hopped onto this call. I've never done a design session for any house I've bought or car that I've purchased. So it does feel, it is a different kind of motion to go through, right? For be like, oh, you want to run what ginormous legacy enterprise app on-prem, and you might even do it today, but you also want to do an upgrade when you migrate. Here's why that design session will clarify a lot of all the inputs that we need to know for this complicated system.
But Jaira, that's the house examples. Have you ever built a house from scratch, either yourself or through a builder?
Not all the way from groundbreaking.
Yeah. But if you do, like, you have the design center, you have the plans, you have lots of things that go along with consulting methodologies, and it does apply. And then if you're buying one that's an existing house, you already know what it's going to look like, and then you buy it and then maybe make a few slight adjustments. You probably do it, but it's just so natural to do it when you're buying a house. But a sysadmin or an IT manager or director buying $500,000 worth of hardware thinks he needs to skip all that.
Right. Your general contractor doesn't ask you, what's your square footage requirement? And what if you need 50% more square footage in 3 years? How are you going to solve that?
Right.
It's a different sort of question asking directive than you encounter in your personal life.
But all those things are better with hyperconverged and Nutanix. Those are the things that you guys help solve, but it's still not perfect, and you can still get it drastically wrong if you don't come close to measure 3 times, cut once.
Yeah, it's interesting. Don't you think house buying, like almost the first cut, right? Your high level filter criteria is price, right? Almost always, because there's almost nothing else like, oh, but this feature is nice, oh, but that's nice, that like magically lets you afford double the mortgage per month. So like if price is your high level filter, that's fine. And then you think of houses, like, okay, if I want to spend whatever, $100,000 on a house, mythical, right? But at least we'll go super low here. Then there's only a couple of different ways that a $100,000 house can be shaped. Buying enterprise IT, buying $500,000 of infrastructure of any vendor, right? Not just Nutanix. There's like 25 different ways that can come out. And only a handful of them are going to really run your application with the performance that you need to, right? Like, did you buy a backup cluster, but you want to run production on it, right? Did you buy a crazy fast cluster? Oh, but you forgot that you actually need more storage than you planned on. Like, it's just lots of different inputs that you can, that are worth, hammering out on the front end.
Yeah. The key there is you're highlighting that it's the resource load that you're going to need. That's not negotiable. You're either going to need it or you're not. The application is going to determine that, and you're going to need it. And so you have to buy into that as you make your decisions versus, just choosing to live with less square footage or a more expensive mortgage.
Yeah.
Or on a cheaper side of town. All right, well, Harvey, I should have done a better job revealing to you, but Jaira and I have decided we're going to cover this blog from October 26th. Is that Mark Levy, I think is the name.
Mark Levy, yep.
Mark Levy, sorry. Totally sorry. Getting started with Red Hat OpenShift on Nutanix HCI hyperconverged infrastructure. I've been wanting to talk to you guys about Red Hat for a while now, so this aligns really well with a topic I wanted to cover. And so, Harvey, you're just along for the ride.
I'll take it. I'll figure out how to add value in some way.
Well, this one's likely to be the Jaira show, but that's good because that's why we're here and why I'm sure a lot of people listen. In fact, I know based on talking to a lot of Nutanix folks, they like to listen because of what Jaira might say.
Well, fine then. I'll shut up since I'm just chopped liver. Old baloney.
so much pressure to deliver. No, I think it's fun content, right? It's a wonderful blend of how do we, like we're talking about, how do we use infrastructure and capabilities to run what the business cares about, which is the applications, right? And do it in a efficient fashion. So
Jaira, what is this whole Red Hat OpenShift on Nutanix HCI? What's the idea? What's the premise? Why did this happen?
So back when the Earth was young, right? We started building servers. No, the why. No, the why is actually, I think we said this from our .next conference, right? The why is customers, right? Saying, I love Nutanix. I want to run my apps on Nutanix. I love Red Hat and I love OpenShift, right? And OpenShift being Red Hat's, supported ecosystem and build and branch and offering for Kubernetes, right? So this is a way of packaging and running my applications in production, and it's, I think, entirely hardware agnostic, right? It's infrastructure agnostic. You can run OpenShift in the cloud, on-prem, hybrid, multi-cloud, like we run all of that. And so if customers want Nutanix for their infrastructure and they want OpenShift for their application delivery model, then they really want Nutanix and Red Hat playing nicely together, right? And so we've solved that with this alliance and partnership. Now we can say those are two great tastes that taste great together. So that's the why, right? Is really beginning and end customer demand. It really wasn't a technical problem to solve.
This is the idea that we're going to be able to run OpenShift on-premises Nutanix HCI solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yep, really Nutanix anywhere, technically, to be fair. Like, even there's no reason you couldn't run it on clusters as well. So bring your hardware as a service model, run AOS on it, and that'll also run OpenShift very well.
So this is really a matter of customers who want Kubernetes through Red Hat, but want Nutanix to be a layer between the on-premises hardware or the in the cloud technologies, so that it's kind of universal for them,
totally,
no matter where they're at.
Yeah, totally. Our customers that even, there's a huge amount that have already deployed their OpenShift, right? They're already somewhere down the path of their OpenShift journey of, this is how we're going to run our next gen cloud native applications in production. And so that ability to say, you already run OpenShift, here's why Nutanix runs OpenShift very well and why it's an easy transition for you. But here's what you get out of that, right? Everything we've talked about from a infrastructure management, planning, acquisition, lifecycle model, that can now apply to your OpenShift stack as well.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the visual here. You still have AOS in play, of course, AHV, and then there's Nutanix files, and then OpenShift is somewhere higher up on the stack. So OpenShift is a container, a Kubernetes type container. Is that what it is?
OpenShift is, yeah, the Kubernetes distribution, right, from Red Hat. So they they can publish it, they can support it, right? You can call them and say, hey, I see this, or I have a question about that. And it's, of course, a more supported, probably more rough edges sanded off than forging your own, blazing your own Kubernetes trail, right? From building from source, right? Deploying from repos, right? It's like, well, no, I just want to, get my distribution from Red Hat, know it's supported top to bottom, or bolt it onto existing OpenShift installations I might have in my environment, right? I can build new pods on Nutanix that would be part of my enterprise app fabric that might already exist.
So this is starting to make more sense to me, right? So you listen to VMware, they've got their Kubernetes play. This is where Nutanix, instead of creating your own, is just partnering with best of breed Red Hat, and allowing Nutanix to be part of the Red Hat story, and vice versa. Like you said a while ago, two great tastes taste better together. That's all this really is, right? It's two best of breed products agreeing to be partners with each other.
Yeah, well, actually, we even do have our own, right? We launched Carbon a couple of years ago. It's more about the, what's your right use case. If you're in that, I want the enterprise grade, give me the full ecosystem, the full stack, from like my build pipeline, my repository of where my containers live, whether waiting to get deployed, load balancers, ingress managers, that can all be supported by one full OpenShift stack. Whereas our Carbon offering it's literally just the Kubernetes leg in the stool and lots of other things to build around it. So it's even more enterprise ready, even more turnkey, right? You have the full developer pipeline ready to go versus, here's a foundation, you can go build your house on top of it, right?
So more along the lines of one of my favorite topics, flexibility.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And then part of the why Nutanix, right, would be that persistent storage, right? There's very few applications in the world that you want to run that don't need to ever store data, right? Like for the most part, most applications want to store data and then retrieve it later on. And the flexibility that we bring there, offering with either Nutanix files for SMB and NFS connectivity, Nutanix objects for S3, or volumes for block storage, whatever language your application wants to speak, whatever its parlance for storage is, like we've got that.
It's not uncommon for us to be having an application-centric conversation. It comes back to what Nutanix is doing with files as a way to, as you said, hold the data stored, the state of storage for the data, which you never get away in an application world without having some level of data that needs to be persistent.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Yeah, a lot of times I ask, what's the most important thing in IT? It ends up, I like to think that it's applications, and every once in a while somebody hits me with data, and like, well, you can't have one without the other, so that's not wrong.
Yeah.
True story.
So Jaira, is this Nutanix telling this story, and Red Hat just kind of lets it happen, or are both companies truly going to market together with better together?
I can only speak for my little piece of the world, but yeah, I think we're working very well with Red Hat teams, with them being the preferred Kubernetes solution and us being the preferred platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Guys, give me an example of some of the more popular apps that are happening through containers. Like I live in a virtual machine world, a lot of desktop virtualization, a lot of x86 applications. What am I not seeing that's happening all around me that I don't realize is happening in containers?
Well, so one whole compartment there, right, is going to be companies' homegrown apps, right? If it's an app that you write, develop internally, you then have to, productize it in production. This is where the whole DevOps things come into play around. We don't just want people over here that write the app, people over there that have to run the app, but it's two different teams, right? If that was one team that owns the pain of supporting it, but then can also write it in more secure and optimized ways on the front end that can help it get deployed more easily. Internal apps, those will never make headlines, rarely, or they shouldn't make headlines.
I hope not, right?
At least in a marketing sense, right, around adoption, right? Because it's like it's a single customer application, right? You wrote it, you run it, and it runs your business, and you make money off of it, hopefully. So that part, like, right, we will never get a very bright light on from a glitzy marketing standpoint of what apps do I want to containerize, because your apps they're your apps. Does that part make sense?
No, it does. It does. And that's why living in the world I live in, I don't see a lot of containers, but I'm usually working with off the shelf or cloud as a service technologies, not internal corporate written apps.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Right. So that's, often there are flavors to this conversation around, if it's the IT director or the IT leader saying, I need to provide containerized, compute platforms and containerized storage to my app teams, right, as they're doing their jobs. Let's talk through public versus private versus hybrid multi-cloud versus, native cloud itself, where Kubernetes was born. What makes the most sense for my needs, right? That's where, we're solving problems, helping the IT infrastructure team empower the app team and therefore the business. But often the apps themselves can be a bit abstracted from us. In general, though, right, like a almost somewhat dumber, more simplified answer is kind of whatever runs as an app, like the containers that run here at my house. There's load balancers, there's some web servers, there's like some databases, not your traditional, Oracle SQL enterprise databases, right? Like Postgres, like MySQL, stuff like Cockroach. So CouchDB, like a lot of your next gen applications are much more friendly at being containerized and containerized packaging.
Hey, Harvey, what's he talking about?
I don't know. Jarvis over there talking about cockroaches. His propeller started spinning, and he just took off.
I mean, if you're going to take away one thing, you shouldn't have cockroaches in your couch, right? I think we can all agree on that.
Let me tell you about the applications that run at my house. Cockroaches and couches and MySQL databases.
Yeah, you got cockroaches and couches. You need to run the RAID application.
No, Nutanix is a no RAID platform.
No, the RAID application.
Nice.
Well, no wonder people love listening to our podcast.
You can run VPN, concentrators at your house. You can run, what typical home application, like a Plex server runs as a container, right? So that's the application vendor's choice to publish it in a containerized fashion, right? You can install Plex on Linux, Plex on Windows, Plex as a container. It's just another distribution mechanism for them.
Yeah, no, I know. I just haven't done any of it. I just haven't run across the need to yet, but I'm sure it's coming in everybody's world to do it as a container. Why would you install it if you could just lay down a container and turn it on?
Well, the need comes in at scale, right? Like traditionally, if you can call it tradition, last 10, 15 years of IT, right? We have deployed an OS underneath virtually every app, right? As servers got too big, and the physical server, you just couldn't buy them small enough for your application, right? I couldn't buy a physical rack mount server small enough to be a domain controller. It's overkill, right? My domain controller would be like 2% busy on a heavy day. So I've got to do other things with that hardware. Enter virtualization. Virtualization means I need shared storage so I can migrate and have high availability. Yep. As long as my hardware economics are staying way out in the distance, then I don't really care about building an OS and virtualizing it beneath every single application. But when I step back and I look at my cluster and I say, well, this whole cluster is running like 40% my OS and 60% my apps, or maybe vice versa, depending on how fat your OS is, or like what I don't know, in-guest monitoring agents you're running. Then you might think, well, how do I get rid of that 40%, right? If I can run more OS instances, fewer OS instances, but more app instances, then my blend is going in the right direction, right? So it's all about, in some ways, constraint, right, is always the catalyst for that kind of innovation.
And everything we're talking about here is containers, and it just so happens that Kubernetes is the containering system that won out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely got way broader adoption. And just me talking here from my anecdotal viewpoint, way broader adoption than like Docker Swarm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it never hurts to be, Google's chosen platform, and Google, really Google developed, right? Because that's going to give you a huge leg up in the open source community.
Is this the Blu-ray versus Laserdisc conversation?
No,
I think Blu-ray versus
HD DVD.
HD DVD, that's right.
Yeah, right.
Harvey, you just compared like something from 5 years ago to something 25 years ago or something.
Which is common, right? Like typically that's what we would all hear, right? Is, do I want VMs or containers? And it's like, well, you probably want both. In fact, you probably want containers in your VMs, but they're gonna do different things, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking to a kid who had Laserdisc. Like the only kid in town had Laserdisc. I had 4 movies. That's it. And then after that, we had Betamax instead of VHS. So I had 20 movies, and everybody else got to go to the movie store and pick any movie they wanted. But mine were high quality. Mine were higher quality than theirs. But I had 20. That was it.
Well, I am happy for that childhood experience for you, because it taught you to pick the right technology later in life.
So Harvey, our kids that are similar ages, would your kids know what to do with a DVD if you handed it to them?
Probably not.
Same. There's nothing in my living room that you could put that in, and they have never experienced that workflow in their life. And I love it, right? Because I've never found peanut butter in, a Blu-ray, player slot that it shouldn't be in.
Think about how fast things move. My oldest kids are 19. We had VHS tapes. Like we didn't even have DVDs when they were first. Right. We had them, but they weren't widely used, or it wasn't in your car. You had a VHS player in your car. And now you just hand them a device and they just pick whatever movie they want real time.
Yeah, it's wild how like you could buy, like for like a minivan, you could buy an iPad for every seat in the minivan and still save money over like the quote in-car entertainment system, and you actually have fewer fights. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, that's just my kids maybe, but
no, I used to have to pull over and rewind the tape halfway to the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, the struggle was real. As we're moving and packing up here, a DVD fell out from behind some boxes on a shelf, and it's like, oh, this is still on my list of things to digitize, but it's like, where do I start digitizing a VHS tape? This is gonna stay on the to-do list for a little while here.
You got to pay somebody just to do it.
That's over. If you haven't done it by now, you're not getting that one.
I mean, I'm with you, and I don't think my wife listens to this podcast, but we're gonna keep that between you and I.
Yeah. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's over.
Yeah, I'm not gonna give that.
I've got a bin full of DVDs over here that we burned along the way. I've got to somehow get I'm waiting to buy a massive computer here at home. I can put them all on here and then upload them to the cloud. And hopefully when I'm dead and gone, somebody will look at them at least once after all that effort. Sorry.
That's the hope. I mean,
good luck.
In my opinion, if it's home movies, I think that cloud is YouTube, right? And if they're not on that, they probably will never get watched.
Facebook.
Hey, here's my S3 bucket of videos, kids. Here's the public private access keys.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got this one covered. I think Harvey Gyra proposed two. One that we'll leave for next week. I think it was flow related. Pretty exciting, actually.
Yes.
We chose to go Red Hat because I was almost employee number 5 at Red Hat. Kind of, sort of. I screwed that up. Big mistake back in the day.
So you didn't learn how to choose the best technology.
Oh, I've made tons of mistakes. That's how you live, I guess. I don't want to say learn.
Right.
We can learn from both of them. It's fine.
Yes.
And this is going to be over some cadence that I'm not privy to, a series actually of like getting Red Hat up and running on getting OpenShift up and running on Nutanix. So we'll probably revisit this later on when part 2 of this blog series drops.
Yeah, love to do it. Maybe we can actually record a session. We're actually walking through. I assume it doesn't take extremely long. We'll find out.
All right, guys.
Well,
that's what I mean. Don't spoilers for part 2.
Thanks for jumping on and doing this on a Monday afternoon, and I'll get it up and posted, and we'll move on to next week's topic.
Sounds good. We'll do it.
All right, guys. Thanks.